My ministerial colleague, Shri V. Muralidharan ji, former Union Minister O. Rajgopal ji, Shri R. Sanjayan, Director Bharatiya Vichar Kendra, Shri A. Balakrishnan ji, President Vivekananda Kendra Kanyakumari, Shri Dr. N. Santosh Kumar, State Vice President Bharatiya Vichar Kendra, Shri S. Rajan Pillai ji, distinguished guests, friends, brothers and sisters. It is a great privilege for me today to deliver the third memorial lecture instituted in the memory of Swargiya Parameswaran ji. So I would like to begin by thanking the Bharatiya Vichar Kendra for thinking of me on this occasion and allowing me to share some thoughts with you. About the late Shri Parameswaran ji, I don't think I need to say anything to this audience. But there were two aspects of his activities and I would say profile with which I could find a connect. One, all of you know very well, which was that he led a very successful effort for readings during the Ramayana Masa, and that is something with which I could resonate, and I will, in the course of my lecture, give you some very detailed explanations for why that is so. The other was, I've learnt he was a member of the court of JNU, which is a university where I had studied, and I found that to be a very interesting association as well. I am speaking to you today about what Bharat could do to create a more just world order. But at the core of that thinking is the quest for a Bharat to be a Atmanirbhar Bharat. And to approach this subject, and this is the identification which I was speaking of, I would like to share with you a perspective which I have taken in a book which I just released a few days ago, which is looking at the world, at today's world, through the perspective of the Ramayana. Now, you will naturally ask, this is diplomacy, it is international affairs, it is political science, we are talking of 2024. Why are you putting on the lens of Ramayana to look at this world? I think traditions have much to teach us. As we have become more self-aware, more self-confident, we are discovering bit by bit what people like Swargiya Parameswaran ji actually exhorted us for many years to do. In the last 10 years, for example, what was something which was so natural for Indians and in fact for many people around the world, the practice of yoga, has today gained credence because of the self-awareness, because of the propagation of this extraordinary heritage of mankind. Or let us take wellness and traditional medicines. Especially during COVID, we found that a lot of people wanted to find solutions, wanted to take precautions which would enable them to face the prospect of COVID with a degree of confidence. And it's to me very significant that very recently, just a few years ago, the WHO decided at the instance of our Prime Minister to establish the Global Center of Excellence on Traditional Medicine in India. I'll give you a third example, and this is an example of the year 2023. We took the lead to move in the United Nations a resolution which advocated the International Year of Millets. It was not just another resolution. Millets are something which is as old as human beings. All of us, particularly older, or I would say more experienced people like me, we have grown up with memories of eating millets in our childhood. And somewhere along the way, millets gave way to wheat. Now, today, there is a strong realization. Millets are more nutritious. Millets have a softer carbon footprint. Millets can be grown by small, in fact, are grown by small farmers. So it is greener, it is healthier, it is economically more inclusive, but it was a tradition that we had started to forget over many decades. So my first point I make to you, which is why I chose the perspective of Ramayana, is the value of traditions. Because we tend to think of traditions, we counterpose, people say tradition and modernity. To approach modernity without a sense of tradition is to say, I've forgotten who I am, but I think I know what I want to be. We can't be something if we don't know where we are coming from and what we are. The second is something like a great epic. It is such a valuable heritage. Actually, everybody in any walk of life will look upon it from their perspective. So, as children, we looked upon it, many of us, because we heard it from our grandparents or parents, or then those who followed it more assiduously. We thought of it as a story. It was not wrong. But from different professions, people would look at the same epic from that particular lens. A doctor, for example, would look at Vishalyakarni from a medical perspective. Someone who is interested in physics will look at what is the traveling times and distances and mechanisms in the Ramayana. I look from the perspective of a diplomat, of a politician, as someone who has spent a life in negotiating, in shaping choices, in making choices. And I can tell you that there is a lot in the Ramayana from which we can learn. And finally, as I said, in an era of globalization, for me, looking through the lens of our history, our tradition, our culture, gives me a solid foundation with which we approach the world. Because there is a narrative out there. In fact, there is not only a narrative there, that narrative is here also. That we are all the same. That history, traditions don't matter. That is something ignorant, that is something we should forget. When someone tells you that everybody is the same, let me tell you, this is a new form of domination. Nations are different, cultures are different, people are different. We all have traditions, culture and heritage to be proud of. And Viksit Bharat, Atmanirbhar Bharat, a Bharat that will shape the world, can only forge ahead if we always remember who we are. So let me share with you the idea, okay, what did the Ramayana teach a diplomat, a foreign minister in office? Ambassador Srinivasan sir is sitting right in the front row. So I started my service under his training. So he will confirm. Today there is a big talk about what is called a rules-based order. Rules-based order means that there are 190 something countries, but when they deal with each other, there must be some rules, norms, organization. In fact, we say New World Order. Order means rules. Now, how do you arrive at rules in competition? Through ethics, through norms, by letting out that this is good, therefore please try to do it. This is not good, so please don't do this. Now, you cannot find a better example of the striving for rules, for creating a system which is based on good conduct, than you will find in Ramayana. In fact, we associate Lord Rama with good conduct. So, what was a person's conduct in a rules-based order should also be a nation's conduct. So, you might say, okay, maybe our foreign minister suddenly has got very principled and he's forgotten very basics of statecraft. You know, in statecraft, you deal with very tough people, not always nice people, not always ethical people. So, I want to make an important point here. Ethics and principles should be the norm. But if you follow the norm, sometimes when a situation requires, divergences are accepted. So, even in the Ramayana, that there would be occasions when Rama would have, let us say, conducted himself in a manner in which there could be a debate. But in the totality of things, we looked at him from the overall conduct. And I would say even today for states, for a nation like India, if we do the right thing with the world, most of the time, ideally all the time, but sometimes if some situation demands, believe me, the world will understand. So, let me give you another example of international relations. After all, what is the story of Ramayana? That he acquires skills. He is tested. The big test is bending the bow. That is exactly what happens to nations when nations rise. Let us look at our own country. You know, by having a strong economy, we pass a test. By carrying out nuclear test and developing a nuclear arsenal, we pass another test. It is like stringing a bow. It may be a nuclear bow, but it is a bow. It may be a technology test. We may be tested like Rama was tested by Parshuram. So we may be tested in other situations. Nations can be tested by their neighbors. So how a nation will always rise through a series of tests, just like great people in human history have risen. But nations don't only rise for themselves, they also rise for common good. So if you look, Rama, for example, goes to forests because rishis, their penance, their prayers are interrupted by demons, by asuras. Today, people will use these words. They will say global good, global commons. Countries should do for the world. It is conceptually not that different. But let us look at how the Ramayana itself unfolds. What does Rama need? He needs a Lakshmana. Yeah. I mean, without a Lakshmana, because a Lakshmana can, when situation demands, can make your resolve firmer. When situation demands and Lord Rama is angry, he can cool him down. He did that with Varuna when Rama got angry. He strengthened his resolve when Sita was first abducted by Bharat. So, for every country, we need solid, almost brother-like friends. That the more friends you have, the more people who will go through the journey of ascending the international order, the stronger you are. But it's not enough to have just a limited circle. Eventually, when Rama ends up at the shores of India and looks at Lanka, he has created a coalition. The Vanara Sena is with him. He has loyal people like Jatayu who will give up their lives for him. So, think about it in international relations. To have a Lakshmana, to have a Vanara Sena, to have a Jatayu, these are great benefits for a nation. And great benefits to those who have been tested and those who are today rising in the world. Now, as you all know, I've spent my whole life as a diplomat till I became a minister, and that too I ended up as a minister of diplomacy. And when I look at Ramayana, I see some great diplomats there. The one which all of you know is, of course, Hanuman. And this story we know from childhood, how he went there, how he conducted himself, how he got information, how he made very good assessments. Remember, it was Hanuman's assessment of Vibhishana which actually influenced Rama to accept him when he crossed over sides. But there are other diplomats. Uncut is a great diplomat because he was given a different mission. He was told to go very firmly, present himself before Ravana, create doubt in Ravana's mind. Diplomats are very good at doing that also. Or I give you another example. Angud's mother, Tara. That when Sugriva forgets what his obligations are to Ram and Lakshman, it is actually, and Lakshman comes very angry, it is actually Tara who manages him and very tactfully persuades him to accept the I would say lack of discipline in Sugriva. So why I say this is, when we speak about Bharat, when we speak about what should be our influence in the world, I can tell you we are all brought up with Western examples. People will say, this Metternich is a great diplomat, Machiavelli was a great teacher, Henry Kissinger, they were all great. I'm not disputing it. But I think sometimes, there is we today, if part of our confidence should be to look at our own homes, at our own traditions, at our own examples. And I can tell you, if I take these examples and talk to you about foreign policy, you are all more likely to understand what I am saying than if I give you some complicated thing from American history or European history. Now, I spoke about diplomacy. Let me give you an example of the opposite. What happens when nations or people get very arrogant? when they become very complacent, when they believe we are so strong that nobody can defeat us. This is what happened to Ravana. The Ravana got a boon saying nobody could defeat him except human beings, because he thought they don't matter. If you look today at the history of the world, big powers have been brought down or have been contested by people who they thought, oh, these people don't matter. So again, one is to understand what is happening in the world, but one is also even for ourselves. Always keep in mind, have the humility, have the understanding and appreciation of the world if you are to rise. And of course, since we speak today of Bharat, of Vikasit Bharat, of entering an Amrit Kal, I think a big part of it is also discovering our own strength. And discovering our own strength, because that is what has happened in the last 10 years. If 10 years ago somebody has said that the biggest thing in our lives will happen, the worst thing in our lives would happen, which was the COVID. COVID came, it was called once in a century, because something like this happened 100 years ago. And it is only a few years now, few months now since it has diluted in our lives. If at that time somebody would have predicted that India would be the one country which will deal with COVID, which will produce its vaccines, which will invent its vaccines, which will give vaccines to 100 other countries, and which after COVID, when the entire global economy is down, will grow between 6.5% and 7%. None of us would have believed ourselves if he had said that. So, if again, today we have had a great space success, but before Aditya we had Chandrayaan. The impact Chandrayaan has made in the world, and especially, the countries of Asia, Africa, Latin America, is tremendous. Because for them, it is India actually discovering its talent, its skills, its capabilities. When I go abroad, the maximum number of questions I get is not about our politics. It is not even about our economy. It is not about our national security. Most people abroad are very fascinated by how India has embraced digital technology. That for them, Aadhaar, Jan Dhan Yojana, the fact that we are able to do this massive delivery of benefits to people on a scale where every program is the size of the population of a country, sometimes the population of a continent. They marvel at it. And because many of them have the same problem. I went to one Arab country and they actually used exactly that word, saying we have big leakage, because when we try to give benefits to people, a lot of it disappears on the way. It was part of our history. Today it doesn't happen. But because it doesn't happen, let us not take it for natural that it was something which was bound to happen. It has happened because we had the vision, we had the commitment, and we have embraced technology as part of good governance. So discovering your strength is part of how to shape the world. And the example of discovering strength is, of course, again Hanuman. Because Hanuman was cursed to be forgetful, and it is only when he is in divine service that what is his true strength, even he himself realizes. So I shared a lot of this because all of us know Ramayana better than we know any other, I would say, story in our lives. And these examples should set us thinking from our own heritage, our own culture. How do we look at the world? How do we assess the risks, how do we make the choices, what do we do to shape the world order. But to understand what to shape and how to shape, let me also share with you how does the world look at us today. And this actually is the subject of the book which I have just written, which is Why Bharat Matters. Now, I am going to give you very practical examples. Just a few months ago, we had the G20 summit in New Delhi. Frankly speaking, most people expected that we would not succeed. Most nations expected, but even in India, there were people who felt that we would not be able to bring everybody together and produce something serious and substantial and unanimous in the G20. Now, we not only did that, but we did two other very important things. We were able to fulfill a long-standing promise to the African Union that we will make them members of the G20. And I can tell you this was a promise. Every G20 somebody would speak about it and say, okay, next session, we will deal with it. Okay. Modi ji was determined, no, next session, this is going to be done now. The other was actually the views of, the interests of the developing countries, what we call the global south. We were the first country who actually got 125 nations of the global south, and before the G20 began, said, let us sit down and discuss what are your problems so that we can take this into the G20. And at the end of the G20, we also went back to the 125 countries and said, by the way, in that year, this is what we promised you and this is what we have been able to deliver. So, when it comes today, when we speak about Bharat, for the world, they see, first of all, how we have done in G20. Then they look at another area, another region, which is today very much a debate. Sometimes there's a lot of tension there, a lot of contestation there. This is the region called the Indo-Pacific. It is a region east of India, from the Indian Ocean all the way across the Pacific till the shores of western shores of America. Now, there are 4 countries who felt that we should come together because our interests are very similar and we should work together. And these 4 countries, India, America, Japan and Australia, they are known as the Quad. Now, we tried to do this the first time in the year 2007. And some others were not so happy with it. Okay. So, at that time, we had a situation, we took a decision in our national interest, other people were not happy, so we walked back, we pulled back on our decision. Now, other people continue to be unhappy with what we have done. The difference between 2007 and 2017 is, this time we don't walk back. That we have a clear sense what is in India's interest, what is in global interest. If we have to do it and we have to manage the unhappiness of others, we manage it. Now, those are not the only people unhappy. There are some other people also who are unhappy. They were unhappy that there is a conflict going on in Ukraine, and this conflict has put a lot of pressure on, especially on oil, on energy, on, to some extent, on food, on fertilizers. So, we were under great pressure not to buy oil from Russia. Now, if you look at it logically, suppose India had not bought oil from Russia, what would have happened? The same oil from the Gulf, from the Middle East, we would have also gone after it, Europeans would have also gone after it, other countries would have gone. So, Russia would be sitting with oil that nobody is buying, and all of us will be paying much more for a limited supply of oil. So first of all, this would have been bad diplomacy, it would have been bad economics, but most of all, it would have been bad for all of us. That when you go to the petrol pump, you would have discovered what would have been the cost if India had yielded to the pressure not to buy oil from Russia. So I put it to you that whether it is bringing people together, whether it is bridging the way we bridged, the West and the East on G20, whether it is standing up to pressure on Quad or standing up to pressure on oil. And the interesting thing on oil was the people who told us not to buy oil were themselves buying oil. But their view was, we are different. See, you are there, we are here. So their job is to give the advice. Our job, they thought, was to listen to that advice. So when we speak today about Bharat, Bharat is actually, to me, a mindset. It is a sense of confidence. It is a realization of who we are, what we are. And it is only when we have that realization that we will develop a sense of what we want to be. Now, I can give you many other examples, because sometimes it is standing up to pressure, but sometimes it is also having a large heart, a generosity of doing in the world what we would do in our personal lives. I spoke about the COVID. There was in America a country which had 8 times the number of vaccines as the population of the country. 8 times, okay? So, remember COVID, we took 2 doses, then we got 1/3 dose. 8 times, which means 8 doses. Now, nobody takes 8 doses. Next to it were small countries, low income, who did not even get see 1 vial of vaccines. Countries in the Caribbean, in South America, and Central America and Pacific, many of them, the first vaccines they got was India, from India. And I can tell you, sometimes, bad experiences, COVID, we all try to forget COVID, because it's in human nature, you want to put it behind you. But even till late last year when I was traveling, complete strangers, people who have nothing to do with politics, they would come up to me. And in fact, I had this experience, I think in the Dominican Republic. Sometimes even language, I really don't follow Spanish. They would make some indication with their hand and say, thank you for the vaccine. So they were making a Modi ji indication. So it is very, we have to understand today what our generosity has done. The fact that we are still doing our own vaccination. It was not that we said, okay, we will finish and then give you. We were doing our own, but we were willing to share. This is also today part of how the world order will be shaped by us. And there can be worries, the world is today worrying about debt. The world is worrying about connectivity, because many countries, have been given loans which get them very deep into debt. Many countries are put on a connectivity chain which is not in their own interest, but which is driven by a different agenda. So a country which does things for the world, a country which stands up on difficult issues, a country which is able to bring people together, which is, as I said, if you have to have a principled approach, which is willing to say things sometimes which somebody has to say. I think these are all the way by which Bharat is shaping the world. Now, we are shaping the world through these policies abroad. I think we all need to also realize we are shaping the world through what we are doing in India every day. The first example I already gave you. which is how our digital delivery is today. Other countries are absolutely fascinated by this. That because they all have the same problem. They have a problem today, they saw that from the COVID time that many of them did not have certificates. They all gave paper certificates. Even developed countries gave paper certificates. But if you look at daily life, the fact today that we are able to give direct benefits, that we can transfer money without leakage, that we are able to give food to beneficiaries, 80 crores every month, that we are able to give 4 crore houses through Awas Yojana to people who need houses. The fact that we are today trying to connect every house to piped water through Jal Jeevan Mission, or that we know which are the houses, which are the villages which don't have electricity connection. What do we do? That so many people today have come on insurance. All these has happened because today we have a digital network and we are using, in a sense, digital governance. And our digital governance is the most important example that we are setting to the world. And it has a very powerful message because, for many years, there was a belief that democracies are not efficient. So one of the, promises, self-promise, which Prime Minister Modi made to himself very early when he became Prime Minister, was to show under his administration that democracies can deliver. And today, 10 years from now, we are seeing actually how democracies can deliver. There are other ways too, where the world is looking at us. As you know, there is a big concern that too much of the world economy is dependent on, a few countries. That there's too much manufacturing in very limited regions. Now, this is a problem because we saw during COVID if something happens or if the supply chains somewhere get cut. So, I would say today our progress, our domestic development, how we do in our politics, in our economics, how inclusive we are, how we bring up the more vulnerable, take care of the more vulnerable sections of society. I think all of this makes a difference. So let me finally end again as I began with some observations about history. In the world today, there are very few civilizations, very, very few, I can count them on one hand, which still remain nation states. We should never forget our history, we should never forget our civilization, because that is what sets us apart from everybody else. And to do that, we ourselves should take much more interest in our cultural influence and footprint in the world. It could be in the East, if you go to Cambodia or Indonesia or Bali, Vietnam, you can see all the way up to the east coast of China. You can see our historical footprints. That, there are Angkor Wat, everybody knows. There is a very famous place called Mison. There are Shaivite temples which are more 1,000 years old out there. But equally to the west, I am in Kerala. I know how strong your relationship is with the Gulf. But I think you should also be aware how old your relationship is with the Gulf. That for thousands of years, actually people have traded. This is one of the most natural. Wind blew, they came this way, wind blew that way, you went this. So if you look today at what we are doing with the Gulf, yes, I know for 40 years, there was actually political distancing while people tried to get other benefits. But today, these are parts of our history that we need to reclaim. So, whether we look at our recent performance, at some of the examples I gave you, or we study what has happened over 10 years, we see how much. I was yesterday in Kathmandu, and I handed over the last, there's a university library in the biggest university of Kathmandu, Tribhuvan University, which was part of our commitment which we gave for earthquake reconstruction. Today our neighbors feel more secure because there is an India. People have seen during COVID. Sri Lanka saw it during its economic crisis. The IMF was still debating what to do. We were the people who acted. So our neighbors trust us. The region beyond today has respect for us. Much of the world today looks at how India is progressing. They look at our achievements from CoWIN and Covaxin to 5G to Chandrayaan. And I can tell you, the world is actually today getting ready for us. It is we who have to make that effort to actually prepare for a bigger role. And to do that, we must do it with a sense of historical and civilizational responsibility. So once again, I thank the Mancham for giving me the privilege to share some of the thoughts with you. And thank you very much for listening to me.
By Diganda Resort, Ahmedabad, Gujarat.